let's create a really fun mixed media collage using some fun decorative papers. I have a huge stash of decorative papers that I've created myself, but I also have a pad of collage decorative papers that I picked up at a local art supply store. This one was at Hobby Lobby. So I'm starting with my background paper just so I have the size that I want, and then I trace and cut out and glue down the very background paper, and I'm going to build up a collage landscape where I'm going to layer forward and backward with my papers to create the foreground, middle ground, background, and any other details that I want to add in. And I really love texture and pattern, so I really thought this would be a lovely piece to use for my sky. So this is the sky of my piece, and then I'm kind of deciding what I want to do for the landscape. And I didn't really have a plan other than I knew I wanted to do collage with decorative paper and a landscape. So this paper reminded me very much of water, so I decided to do some water in my landscape. And I could measure this out, I could mark it up, but I think it's just as easy to kind of lay your paper down over your other paper and then use that to measure it, because I'm not that interested in getting it, perfectly measured, and I can always trim everything up as I go along. So I'm gluing this one down to represent my water. And I'm just using a basic glue stick. This paper is very thin, so it's easy enough to glue it down with a glue stick. If I was using thicker paper, I would probably use white liquid glue, and I would paint that on so that I had a little stronger adhesive to keep my landscape together. And then this paper was really interesting. It's got a lot of value variation. It's also got the line work in it. So I decided to use it to create different aspects of the land. And so I'm doing a mixture of tearing the paper and cutting the paper, but ultimately I want the torn effect so that I really get that rugged edge instead of the smooth edge that I would get with my scissors. And then you see I glued it down first, and then I'm trimming it down to size. And then I still have those scraps that I can incorporate in later. And this gives me a nice strong foreground. And the strip that was left over looked like it was going to work really well for the idea of maybe a tree coming up the side, and I was very excited about that, but I made the mistake of setting it off to the side, and you'll see in a second what happened. So this piece that I tore off to form my tree trunk looked really great for the back of my water, kind of where the sky and the ground were going to meet for my horizon line, or at least the start of defining that. So I took that scrap and I had to curve it a little bit so that it matched the curve of my water, and then I'm kind of tucking it down underneath it as I glue it in place. And then notice I put the tree trunk up off to the side. Just watch the paper and see what happens. So now I go ahead and pick out some more paper in a brighter green to be my even further back mid-ground or background aspect. And then I'm going to glue that down and tuck that underneath my water, because the other one was just kind of in place, and commit to where that's going to be. And I know I'm wiggling it a little bit to get it to line up how I want it, even though I know I'm going to have a tree going up the right side. And then I forgot that this was my tree, so I tore it up. Oh, I was so bummed when I realized that I had done that. But it must have been meant to be another section in the back. I kind of forgotten, I guess, that I had that other piece already torn out for it, and that I was saving that for the tree. But it gives me a taller section, and this is where I'm like, where's my tree? Where did my tree go? I cut it up. I tore it up. So I had to just kind of live with that decision and figure out a way to resolve it in the end. So I ended up putting the tiny little scrap down too, and in the end it worked out better because I ended up having more variation to my rolling hills and mountains in the background. And then the great thing is you can always trim up your paper, because I'm not very accurate about gluing all the way to the edge, so I could easily trim up my water to make that make more sense. And then I can go in like now and kind of do some more stronger adhesion and kind of get those loose ends to stick down as I commit more and more to where the pieces are going to go. And then I can go ahead and trim up the sides, just kind of always kind of keeping things cleaned up and adjusted. Now, I still really want that tree trunk, so I have to use a different part of the paper to create it, which is totally fine. This is not the first time this has happened to me when I'm doing torn paper collage. So I'm going to go ahead and glue down and commit to where the tree is going to go, kind of off on the right side, coming down and overlapping the ground a little bit. and kind of making sure everything is stuck. And then I knew I really wanted to play with some fun, bright colors. I wanted to have some nice contrast, and I'm kind of deciding, do I want to go with more flat paper that's textured for the tree, or do I want to start building up some literal texture and actually have a little bit of relief going on with this sculpt and turn this into more of a sculptural relief 2D dimensional piece versus a flat collage. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my tissue paper and see what colors are in there. I have some nice blues and greens going on in my collage right now, and I've got a lot of darkness happening in there. So I really wanted to contrast that with something bright and fun. And this giant pack of tissue paper has some beautiful colors in it. So I ended up deciding to go with some pinks that were in there. So I'm just gonna get that big stack out, and I'm gonna tear those into strips so that I have some smaller sections to work with. I'm going to pick 2 different pinks so that I have some variation. So it'll kind of be like a cherry blossom tree almost, at least have that kind of that whimsical vibe that cherry blossoms can have. So I've got a dark pink and a light pink, and I'm going to tear those into strips, and I'm going to stack them up so that I can just, tear it pretty easily. And I found that this tissue paper tore straight really well, which is great. So I can tear along the grains and get some nice strips going. And then I'm just going to start crumpling those up and then laying them down into some puddles of glue. So I'm separating them out right now so that I know what I've got, and I'm going to start crumpling them up so that I have some puffy line sections that I can kind of weave together and mix and match around to create the foliage of my tree. And this is a really fun way to work with collage. So you're using the papers as inspiration for what part of the collage landscape they're going to become. And then I love texture, both implied and actual texture. So any chance that I get to put a little texture into my piece, I jump at it. It's just fun. Texture is really fun. So I laid down a ton of white liquid glue, and then I've kind of like pulling them apart, scrunching them, twisting them so that they start to kind of give the feeling of branches that are covered in, beautiful cherry blossoms. Now, I could have collaged down some branches. That would have been another great way to go with this, but I really wanted to keep it loose and playful and just have a nice time doing it and not worry too much about how accurate I was being, and just kind of letting the materials and the colors stand in for the different parts of the landscape. And then I just go ahead and use some extra glue to kind of attach and tack down sections where it's not on top of a glued section, because maybe it's a paper section over a paper section as far as the tissue paper goes. And then tearing them down a little bit so that I have enough to fill all the different sections of my landscape. And I'm just kind of moving them and squinching them so they can kind of help define stuff so it looks like foliage of a tree rather than just a big blob of pink sitting on my paper. And then I did decide to add in some inking detail and have a little bit more texture to my trunk with a micron pen and then a white gel pen too. It's a really subtle effect, but when you see this in person, it really shows up nicely, just those rough little scribbles, so that you can really truly tell what is the tree trunk versus what is the ground. I really wanted to tie that bright pink down into the ground. So I decided to tear up some small sections of tissue paper as if the leaves had fallen or the blossoms had fallen down onto the ground. So I'm going to go ahead and rip off some little itty bitty pieces and crumple those up and then tape and then glue those down on the ground as if they fell down from the tree. And I love how this turned out. This was such a fun, fast collage. I don't often use the collage papers that I find from other people without manipulating them quite a bit. So it was kind of nice to use them and, in their own essence. If you like this video, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe so that you can find out about my upcoming art videos. And I'll see you next time.